Welcome to the latest installment of the Run to Daylight podcast, show, stream, whatever it is you want to call it. I'm here, and I am joined by the fabulous Rich Hribar at Lord Reeves on Twitter, a fellow sharp person. In fact, Rich was kind of the guy who brought me along, so he gets the blame if my content sucks, not me. And, I am fine with that deal, and I want to say hi, Rich. How you doing?
Doing good. Listen, I'm someone that's pretty honest where my strengths and weaknesses lie as a fantasy analyst, and I'm not someone out here. I'm not drafting 300 best ball teams in the offseason. I'm not. So like, why should I be an authority on giving people, best ball advice to that degree? Why not bring someone that is actually doing is drafting hundreds of teams and is doing
700. I think I did like 750 last year. I'm going to try and cut that down to like a human number this year. But
I play and enjoy the strategy, but I would rather bring in someone that's doing the actual work and is doing stuff that is applicable to people and get, instead of just saying like, all right, well, I like these players. Here's what I've drafted on my teams. Like, I'd rather be someone that's doing these. That's a degenerate. How many teams have you drafted already right now?
I did 20 little boards because I liked the fact that it was going to end and I could lock in my opinions. Versus I've only done 3 or 4 big boards, maybe 5, and I'm on my second FFPC. I am way behind from last year, but I'm okay with that. I just feel like I need to spend more time evaluating my thoughts, because when you do a lot of drafts in a short period of time, a lot of times it's easy to get stuck in opinions on who you're taking. And I need more time to just kind of go over my weaknesses. One of which last year was missing out on guys like Rachaad White and James Conner, guys who were locked into pretty big volume, but I didn't like the player. And it was bad process on my part, not bad player picking, because we know at running back how important volume is. We talk about it all the time, but I didn't like them. And, with Connor, it was more about his age and ability to stay healthy and the team not being good. But I was right. Rachaad White wasn't a very effective running back, but he's still crushed because of the volume.
Yeah, and it helped the context of the season. I mean, Christian McCaffrey, there was really a large delta between Christian McCaffrey and the field. So it made a lot of the secondary tier of running backs look a lot better than they were on a weekly level. You look at guys like Rachaad White, James Cook. These are guys that finished as RB1s, but they were more like weekly RB2s. Rachaad White was like a fringe RB1, especially the back half of the year, because the touchdowns kind of started to come along with that production. But we really had an outlier year in terms of, having just one running back at the top have such a wide gap to the rest of the field. The last time it was Christian McCaffrey, I think 2019. It was the largest gap between an RB1 and RB2. So it's just the one guy. So, I mean, listen, as always, keep drafting Christian McCaffrey.
Well, and I didn't last year, and I'll get to that in a moment. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the FFPC. I feel like the FFPC is where you need to play fantasy football this season. No salary caps, no DFS, no new formats to love, just the pure drafting fun that you've loved for years. The FFPC is home to not one, but 2 never too early best ball contests. The one that I play in is the $125 one, which is kind of their traditional 20 rounds, tight end premium, 2 flexes, and with a $25,000 grand prize. But if you're looking for a contest with a 5-figure grand prize, but just a $35 entry, the Never Too Early Superflex Best Ball Tournament might be the contest for you. There's also already 130 incoming rookies in the draft pool. Play now at myffpc.com. Also, keep in mind, if you are more of a season-long guy, the season-long FPC tournament with $1 million up front is already launched. It's earliest ever. And I probably won't dip into that one until at least after the draft. But Rich, it's a lot of ability to play fantasy at a much earlier time. And as you and I were talking pre-show, it takes a little bit of something to, it's like if you were a pothead and the weed was being given out on every corner for a reasonable price. It's tough to hold off when you really like drafting.
Yeah, I'm gonna definitely. I made a point of emphasis this year to really take like the time off of the gap because the NFL won last year, pushed the season back a week, so everything's kind of condensed. So I said I'm gonna make it a real point of emphasis, not to do anything. I'm really gonna unplug, and I did that just this week. I got back to work and started getting the rookies and the rookie model as we're going into combine week. We'll get some attributes and stuff like that, and then hit the ground running out of that. But I needed just a little bit of break. I did 400 articles for the site this year. I just, wanted to just turn football off for a little bit and to enjoy some time. And here we are right back in it. And the free agency's right around the corner. It's the NFL.
It's combine week already.
Yep. The NFL does not give us much time.
So, we just wanted to get together and talk a little bit, kind of get some early thoughts. We're going to go through some of the rookie situations as well as some of the free agent situations. Let's start with a couple of really big picture issues. It came out yesterday that it looks like one day you hear Peter King saying it looks like they're going to trade the number one pick. The next day, the GM's basically saying, well, Justin, it was nice knowing you. One of the biggest decision points in this offseason that so many things are going to kind of fall in behind it is what is Chicago going to do with the number one pick, with Justin Fields. I am of the opinion that if you're a general manager, it is gross behavior not to see what you can get for both, and then make your decision based on what's there. So, I might want to keep Caleb Williams, but if someone offers me 5 first-round picks, but I could only get a third-round pick for Justin Fields, well, Caleb, it was nice knowing you. But it seems missing from a lot of people's process, Rich, that Ryan Poles might be just thinking of something. Let's see what's out there before he makes a final decision.
Yeah, they don't have to right now. Obviously, they made this. I'm trying to think of when they made the trade last year. It was pretty early in the process. I think it was almost like right around this time last year. It was pretty early when they decided to trade that pick, and it probably was based on what Carolina offered. So, do they get an offer like that beforehand? We're gonna have to wait and see. You would think Caleb would be one of those guys, as opposed to where we were last year with how aggressive the Panthers were at Bryce Young. That Caleb would be one of those guys, that one of those teams that theoretically is not picking, in the top, 4 or 5. As it feels like they might get froze out, maybe aren't as high on JJ McCarthy as the field. And they just are in desperate quarterback hell, that Caleb would be that kind of prospect where you might get a sweetheart deal, something you couldn't say no to, even with a guy like having it, say, hey, we have Justin Fields for, another potentially 2 years still on his rookie deal before we have to make like a real hard decision on him. So, yeah, I think that's what he's doing. He's keeping it open, definitely part of the process. I feel bad for Justin Fields in a sense that if he is out and it's not really, you just look at what Caleb's got a potential to walk into. Let's say Caleb does go to the Bears. He's walking into just such a better situation than Justin Fields did when he was drafted on a dead in the water Bears team, already had, some rollover, where Caleb is going to get to more of this working with this team that's got a couple of years into the process. They've got a little better offensive line than what Fields started with. They've got DJ Moore in place. They're probably going to take a wide receiver at pick 9 too, if they stay there. So he's going to have something else to work with. There's just a lot better. It's just a lot better environment for Caleb Williams going to the Bears than it was for Justin Fields.
There are some red flags with Caleb Williams. He did not play as well his senior year as he had earlier. And he's made some comments that I know, based on my history, that NFL people aren't going to like, right? They don't like diva players. Him talking about, wanting a piece of the team, things like that. He doesn't even have an agent right now. I'm not saying that I don't draft Caleb Williams, but I don't think you overlook how important having your head on right is at the quarterback position in the NFL. And we've seen pretty talented players who didn't have their heads on right not live up to the booking. I mean, and even a guy like Trevor Lawrence, who was the most valued quarterback in the, if you go back a few years, he was as wanted, very similar to Caleb Williams, where he had a really great junior year and everyone thought he was the Messiah, easy number one pick. And, he's been good, but he certainly hasn't been great. So quarterback is tough, Rich. And I think from my time on Twitter, I always come away with people really not understanding just how hard it is to find that guy.
Well, and CJ Stroud didn't do many favors either. It's kind of now we want more out of the box. We want more production. It used to be you get some time to develop as a quarterback, and now if you don't show something even as a rookie, I mean, look at Bryce Young, the situation he's going into year 2, right? Like he's left for dead, like almost by the field. Like by default, like he's going to be better. Like he's probably going to be better than he was. I mean, Bryce Young's probably a guy I will in these best ball leagues probably is the guy I'll be targeting, to be honest. Like he'll probably be a guy I'll be looking to get just because of the pedigree and the year 2 discount, right?
I haven't been, but you can certainly make a case that is a good strategy.
Yeah, I mean, just by default. So, I mean, definitely Stroud's, rookie performance didn't do Caleb any favors. But when you're looking, the great thing about us is that I don't need him to be a franchise turner, right? Like, 'cause that's not where I'm putting my money at. I'm not a scout in that development. All I care about is the fantasy production. And when you're still looking at it from like an archetypical stance, there still is just there's 2 guys that stand out as like have that pathway to be kind of those elite entities in the modern way fantasy is scored, and he still qualifies to be one of those guys. Jaden Daniels being the other because of just the weight that you get through rushing. I mean, basically, if you're talking about JJ McCarthy, Drake May, Bo Nix, those guys all have to have a passing season like equivalent to what CJ Stroud put together, because those guys don't really offer. These guys are athletic just because by due process of human evolution, they're better athletes than we were getting like from the old pocket passer days. Like these guys we're just getting better athletes that play the position of quarterback now. So everyone has some functionality to them and some athleticism and a little bit of rushing, but those guys aren't giving you the kind of rushing that can overcome a bad passing performance. And that's what we had with Bryce Young last year. He was that kind of runner in college too. Like he was more of a scrambler. And that's what we have with those other 3 guys. But with Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels, like we have a path for those guys to really be effective fantasy players while still being struggling and developing as passers, where inversely that doesn't happen. So that's why when you still look at the breakdown of this class, those 2 guys still do stand out. Because of that pocket they fill in. I would say I would bet on these guys all struggling as passers instead of the inverse, right? Like I'm not looking for a lot of guys to be the CJ Strouds, especially when they come with, the capital. Like CJ Stroud last year was like QB 20-ish off the board. I don't know where Caleb's going off now. I imagine it's somewhere like in the QB teens because everyone's expecting
he's moved up a little from where he was. So let me give you my
but I imagine there's a gap, right? Like there's Caleb, probably Jaden Daniels, and then for fantasy purposes,
I can look it up. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Caleb's 16 and Daniels is 18. So and Caleb's moved up a round or 2 in the month that I've been drafting. So my thoughts on this class right now was I was coming out of those 20 little boards. I had 50% ownership between the 2 of them. So in half my teams, my second quarterback was either Caleb Williams or Jaden Daniels. My thought process was that they were going, at the time they were going behind Jared Goff
Oh yeah, yeah.
and
Probably
Trevor
like
and Trevor
Cousins and
Lawrence
Stafford.
and Tua, and they were going in front of Stafford, Cousins, and Rodgers.
Okay.
And I thought at that price, because of that rushing floor, and Caleb Williams has an underrated rushing floor. I mean, he likes scoring touchdowns. He's not the rusher Jaden Daniels is, but he's faster. In the tape I watch, he is faster than Patrick Mahomes. He doesn't mind tucking and running. And if you give him a read option near the end zone and it's a chance for him to score a personal touchdown, he's going to take it. That was my takeaway from watching him.
Yeah, yeah. He had 7 rushing touchdowns inside the 5-yard line
Yeah.
last year.
Yeah. So I really like them. Drake May is a guy that I wasn't on, but I'm starting to mix in. And JJ McCarthy is a guy who I'm just not that interested in. I mean, I guess he's a fine third quarterback, if you need one. But his path to having a good passing season, it's hard to see him ending up in a spot where they're going to, he wasn't trusted to, or they didn't, that might not be the word. They didn't need him to throw a lot in college. I think he's okay from what I've seen, but him, Bo Nix, Michael Penix, or is it Penix? I don't know. Those guys just really aren't very interesting to me, as the path and the opportunity seems a little rough to me. Any of those thoughts that you would push back on?
No, I mean that grouping of quarterback, just they're the finite line that they have to walk to be like QB1s for fantasy is just so tight. Like they have to be so efficient as passers out of the box. And that's just really something I'm not going to bet on very often, from rookie quarterbacks. The other interesting thing though about this quarterback class is, and honestly, it's class in totality because it's still impacted by COVID. Obviously, now we have the new transfer rules and the NIL money. I mean, this is the oldest draft class that I've done since I've been doing this for a decade, because of that extra year of eligibility that these guys still got through COVID. I mean, Bo Nix, Penix, Jordan Travis, like these guys are all going to be pushing 25 years old as rookies. Whereas, Caleb is going to be a 22-year-old rookie. JJ McCarthy's not even going to be 22 when the season ends next year for the NFL. And then and Drake May is the other young guy. Like those are the only 3 early declares quarterbacks in this entire draft. It's a very older class. It's older across the board of the other positions too, because that's just a unique kind of spot we're in with this draft, still having like these guys on the edge, out the outskirts of having an extra year through COVID. And a lot of these guys got the benefit. So like you look at a guy like Jaden Daniels, what makes him interesting is how real was this last year? How much can we stock from this last year? I mean, he was a, approaching 24-year-old college player, and how much do we give benefit of where he was in terms of development through age, also surrounding scheme, surrounding players. He played with 2 wide receivers that are going in the first round of this draft. One of them is going in the top 10.
I was just going to say, one of my comments about Jaden Daniels is there's very few spots he's going to land where he doesn't have a downgrade at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, I mean, you look at if he goes to New England, at pick 3, if he goes to, I'm trying to think of, Falcons at 8, those are kind of the hot spots if someone doesn't trade up. I imagine he's gone by the time Minnesota picks at 11, and the Broncos pick at 12, Raiders at 13. Like those are teams that are going to have to climb if they want to, draft Jaden Daniels. They're going to have to move.
And I think one of them will for one of these quarterbacks, but I think it'll probably end up being for JJ McCarthy. I think JJ McCarthy will end up in the top 10, and I think he'll be 6th, 7th, 8th. And if the Giants don't take him at 6th, I could see someone else trading up to the Giants at 6th, or someone at 7 to get the 4th quarterback here.
Jaden Daniels, I look at his comp on the positive end and the negative end to me is Robert Griffin. He either could be good Robert Griffin or kind of the bottom of Robert
Griffin. And Robert Griffin, we'll never know what he was.
Right.
Could have been. Right. Like,
but that's what I see. Like he could be that. He is that kind of a rusher where he can be that good of as a rusher and still have flaws as a passer still. but also he could be that limited potentially as a passer to where he never makes that jump, like Justin Fields hasn't, right? Like Justin Fields has been one of those throwback
Justin Fields
phenom
has
guys.
shown. I mean, if you watch a lot of Justin Fields, he makes some great passes.
He does,
right?
and he did that at Ohio State, but he has like massive flaws that like probably are
He
never going to
takes
make
too
him
many sacks,
a
being the
good
biggest
quarterback.
one.
And that's
right?
both of these guys at the top, which is interesting, is both Caleb and Jaden Daniels. Caleb gets the comp to Patrick Mahomes a lot because of the, the throws off platform and the arm strength off platform. But unlike Patrick Mahomes, he does not avoid all those negative plays. I mean, Patrick Mahomes is the most elite sack prevention quarterback in terms of pressure rate that we have in the NFL. And Caleb and both Jaden Daniels were really poor at that in college. Justin Fields was really poor at that in college too. And it's been kind of a problem for him kind of getting over that hump. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of these traits these guys do bring over into the NFL, what kind of sticks. But for fantasy, it's like I said, it's pretty easy still to draw a line in the sand and say from an archetypical stance, though, we still have these two guys that fit what we're looking for. The guys that have that potential for a rushing floor. And if they're better passers out of the box than we're used to rookie quarterbacks being, they're going to just flirt with fantasy production anyways, because that scoring is weighted for them because of the rushing component.
Yeah. So looking at Drake May a little more in depth, I mean, he obviously and co-sharp analyst Ryan McChrystal, one of the sharpest guys I've ever met on the college. He's not a Drake May guy. I watched some of Drake May's tape this year and it was abysmal. But you also see a lot of really good things as well. And he did not have the receivers nor the offensive line this year that he had when he was a junior. But the thing that's interesting about Drake May is he also runs the ball, not to the level of the other two, but he's not gonna be a zero in the running game. And then you add the fact that if he does indeed end up in Washington, he lands with Terry McLaurin, he lands with Jahan Dotson and Curtis Samuel. I mean, the weapons are there for Drake May, and that's kind of what turned the corner for me. Like, I don't know that I draft him in an 18-round draft as a third quarterback because I don't know that I'd have to have a pretty bad second quarterback, which there really isn't one ahead of him that's that bad that I wouldn't mind as a second. But in a 20-round draft as a third quarterback, late in the year, if he comes around with those receivers, I mean, Terry McLaurin has never had anyone with near the arm of Drake May.
And Drake May's gonna push it. Like he's gonna huck it. Like he's not about to check down. He's not about that check down life.
No. And then let's finish out the quarterback position by looking at the free agents. Right now, the two big names are Kirk Cousins and Baker Mayfield. It looks like Baker Mayfield is going to end up back in Tampa, if I had to make a guess. And the tea leaves are starting to look like Kirk Cousins leaving. Would you agree that that's kind of how the tea leaves are looking? And any guesses on where Kirk Cousins might go?
Yeah, that's what it looks like. They're at least going to let him, open free agency as a free agent, right? Like no tag, there's not going to be anything for him. We'll see what comes back. I mean, I think Kirk Cousins staying in Minnesota would be the best for Kirk Cousins, but if they're ready to move on and that's not, both sides are ready to part ways, that's not for us to, that's in that camp. But yeah, I mean, there's a number of spots. I mean, he can still go. I mean, we've seen it. Like, there's only how many teams have an actual quarterback that they're really to lean on. It's not half the league, so he can go to any of these spots. Down at the bottom here and kind of float around and be like the Falcons are a team that probably are going to be in the market for vet, and they're probably the number one spot for Justin Fields, obviously with him being a George boy, potentially going back there. We're still trying to figure out what Seattle's going to do. The Saints are kind of stuck in this purgatory. Probably doesn't end up there. What are the Giants going to do? Like,
I was just going to say
they made their bed, but they also have outs. Like, I don't think the Giants are completely dead on moving on from Daniel Jones, but like they also probably are going to kick it at the can another year on it.
It makes a lot more sense with the money, and the Giants I'm much more likely to see trade up for one of the top quarterbacks if they have their eye on one. Then and then
the Raiders.
the Raiders, Kirk Cousins with the Raiders. If the Raiders don't get Justin Fields, I would think Kirk Cousins. When you look at what that head coach is going to try and do, he doesn't want to rebuild. That head coach is going to want to go 10-6, sneak into the playoffs like his 10-7, sneak into the playoffs like his Giants team did in 2008 and get hot. And Kirk Cousins with those receivers is a huge upgrade.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how this Antonio Pierce thing plays out, because I've seen a lot of people compare it to Dan Campbell, but he didn't show us any inkling of his interim head coaching stint that he had the Dan Campbell gene. Dan Campbell's trying to win games. Like he openly almost got criticized
to a fault at times.
Like Antonio, the style of football that Antonio Pierce played as an interim head coach, like has already shown like that stuff doesn't work big ppicture in the NFL. And especially when you look at the quarterbacks that the Raiders beat in those games, like beating Zach Wilson, beating in the Brandon Staley quick game, Easton Stick, beating Jarrett Stidham. Like the only quarterback they beat that was of any substance was the Patrick Mahomes game, and they didn't even complete a pass the final 3 quarters, scored 2 defensive touchdowns. Like that, like. It's gonna be interesting to see how this Raiders thing plays out. But the thing about the Raiders is they're on the outside of the strike zone to really be players for these quarterbacks without a trade up. They're probably all going to be gone. At least the big, because even if you say JJ McCarthy, if JJ McCarthy's a Raider, like how great is what changes? What changes for the situation? It's not like a great spot for JJ McCarthy to have insulation. Whereas like I look at like a team like the Vikings, right? Like if JJ McCarthy goes to the Vikings, that's pretty solid insulation. Like we've already seen Kevin O'Connell as like a guy who gets it schematically. You have Justin Jefferson, you have Jordan Addison.
That would be a great landing spot for JJ McCarthy.
Yeah, it'd be amazing.
I could regret my no JJ McCarthy. I won't say no. I'm going to be very light on JJ McCarthy.
But from like a Superflex dynasty stance, that would be like the pie in the sky like outcome. Like you don't want to be a Bronco, you really don't want to be a Raider.
Now moving from the position that everyone wants to the position no one wants. I mean, last year we saw all these running backs get franchise tagged, and everyone was complaining about how bad it was for the running backs. It might be worse this year, Rich, with no one being franchised and there being like 8 of them. I think 1 or 2 of them are going to land in the first week of free agency and get a decent contract. And then you're going to have 4 or 5 of these guys just basically sitting with a tin cup on the corner, hoping to get something. What's your thoughts on the running back position? And do you have any favorites among them that you think will get the money early?
Well, lucky for this class, this running back draft class is really not highly regarded. I mean, even if you're someone that doesn't even that does like more of the scouting stuff and likes some of these players from a player stance, and you look at like current like mock draftable stuff, like we might not even have a running back drafted in round 2, let alone round 1. Basically, Blake Corum and Trey Benson from like a mock draftable stance are flirting with like the low 60s range in terms of like
and Jonathan Brooks.
Picks. And he's a little bit lower, like right there. So like we're talking about not a lot of capital is even going to be put into the running back position. It'd be different if this was a great running back draft class. Everyone can sit on their hands and wait. But I do think that there will be some active movement in the opening little bit of free agency here on some of these guys, because I don't think that the NFL is really too keen on a lot of these guys in the draft either. So definitely Saquon is going to be like the gem of it, because he's still in like the apex of his career. He's a guy that we really haven't got to see like, Saquon in like a functional like offense ever, like really ever. So like, is there still a ceiling there? This was a guy that I'm sure a lot of teams 5 years ago had him as an elite prospect.
I think he will have a market. And the other one that I think will have a market is Derrick Henry. I think that someone is going to pay Derrick Henry something.
Well, what makes this class interesting is you have the 2 guys that are like still they're like apex as workhorse backs, Barkley and Jacobs, like guys that have been productive and haven't quite crested to that breaking point. Then you have 2 guys that are past that point, and Eckler and Derrick Henry, who are going to be available, but are like kind of proven. And they're very good in like specific areas too. Like if that's what you want for your offense, right? If you want Derrick Henry, if you're just looking for a guy that could be, because Derrick Henry, even last year on a very bad football team, gave us glimpses. Like there definitely was like a downturn for Derrick Henry in terms of overall production, but there was still plenty of times where you're like, yep, dude still got, like, he still is Derrick Henry. Like he still can give you big plays. So like if an offense still wants that, like you're a team like the Cowboys, right? Like Derrick Henry probably fits a lot. Like now, can you afford him? What is he asking for? What's the price point? But like he would fit. Like if you're a team like the Eagles, that would fit. Like doesn't really use their running backs in the passing game, but what's the cost, right? But and Eckler is the inverse, right? Like Eckler has been one of the most inefficient runners for multiple years now. And even in this stretch where he was scoring a lot of touchdowns with the Chargers these back 2 years, was really not a good runner of the football. But we know he can be used in the passing game. So is there a team that has like, a scheme that wants to use him in that capacity and can really unlock him the best of what he has? And where does he fit? So it's gonna be really interesting. Then you kind of have some like guys that like we're still waiting to figure out like kind of what they really are. Tony Pollard, who claims he didn't come back to like basically full strength for the last quarter of the year, and it kind of plays out if you look at his metrics and his splits based on how effective he was in terms of like missed tackle and explosive run rate the back half of the year. And DeAndre Swift, who has given us these glimpses of being like one of those backs, but really has never been able to stay like really healthy. And hasn't been in like these offenses that have been willing to make him a workhorse. Then you kind of have to just like you're flying blind, right? Like J.K. Dobbins, we don't know what like the rest entails for J.K. Dobbins. It's been a complete loss, like his rookie contract. You got guys like Gus Edwards. Antonio Gibson, I think, is really interesting, right? Antonio Gibson's like a complete wild card. He was kind of doghouse last year, but he has all of this dual purpose ability, and he's shown it on the NFL level. So what does a team do with him, right? Could he be like a guy that like gets one of these like the 1 year prove it deals and then gets to prove it and maybe gets a chance to cash in, kind of a la like what Zach Moss did a little bit last year, right? Like Zach Moss kind of showed when Jonathan Taylor was out, he that guy that people loved during the draft that liked Zach Moss, like that was the best he had played. You got guys like Gus Edwards out here. Who knows like what like AJ Dillon really is. It's a deep class. Devin Singletary was a effective player last year when thrust upon, like, because you think about,
I think he ends up back in Houston. I think
that would make sense.
I think they really liked him. I think he fits what they want to do, even if they bring in another back, because they don't like Pierce.
The Chargers are taking one of these guys, though. I bet the Chargers are drafting a guy.
Pollard is the interesting one to me because he looked so terrible, but he looked a little better at the end of the year. He said he didn't feel like himself to week 11. We've seen time and again people second year off of an injury. I'm surprised that Dallas hasn't made a bid to keep Pollard, and I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up back there. And I don't know the rules. If they hit free agency, can they still re-sign them?
Yeah, they can re-sign him. And honestly, we didn't even bring it up because it's not even official, but like Joe Mixon probably ends up on this list too. Joe Mixon probably ends up available. So another guy that's probably going to be, let go.
And Donta Foreman will probably get a job.
He always does. He always finds a way. Deontay Foreman is literally going to find a way to have a multiple touchdown game next year. I don't know for who, but he's going to find a way to do it.
Yep. At the wide receiver position, Higgins, Pittman, and Evans all look to be back with the team that they were on last year. But Calvin Ridley, Marquise Brown, Gabe Davis, those are the three guys who have a little bit of juice in my mind that look like they could hit the open market. Any thoughts on, like Marquise Brown? He's such a tease.
Yeah, another guy that hasn't been in. And Calvin Ridley, I'd have to look into the specifics, but I think if they let him go, it's like effectively like it still cost them as like an extra pick or something.
No. If they re-sign him, they have to give up either a second or a third. If they let him go, it doesn't cost anything, which is why he's likely not going to end up back with Jackson.
So you probably get a third back anyways with the.
I don't think it's anything. I think it was just
I assume they're going to get a comp pick for him. He's going to sign for enough for a compensatory pick.
Oh, you mean that Jacksonville will get a comp pick?
Yeah, if he does signs elsewhere. So that would be
At the
available.
running back position, I'm a couple of
See,
these
this is
rookies.
the opposite. The opposite, though, like the fringe guys, like if so available at the top, you'll probably see a lot of these guys draw some activity, but it's this draft class, which is really elite at the top. We've got some really haymakers now at this draft. Probably have 3 top 10 wide receivers, 2 other first round at minimum wide receivers, and then a really weird like second round group, which we can maybe get into. But then does that group, the depth, the potential depth of this class, does it hurt the kind of secondary tier of these guys? Like the guys like Darnell Mooney, those types of guys, like those guys
I
get
think it
held
does
out.
hurt. I think
Yeah.
those guys are going to be taking very minimal deals because again, the draft will happen before free agency. So those, I
Right
don't think
after.
I think if a team can get a deal on one of these guys, they'll take it. But it won't preclude them from drafting somebody or 2 or 3 guys.
I mean,
Let's
you're
go
going to see
back.
a lot of 1 year, 2 year contracts, I think, for that group of the Marquise
Yeah.
Browns, the Darnell Moonies, obviously the older guys, like, we're not even counting like Michael Thomas or Odell, like, right. Like, the depth of it,
Demarcus Robinson is back with the Rams, and who would have guessed? I mean, Demarcus Robinson was such a nothing. And then Matt Stafford and McVay. But I want to go back to these running backs. Now, I want to talk about the rookie running backs. So I'm going to throw a couple names of the guys that from my tape watching I really liked. Um, One was Marshawn Lloyd. I felt like Marshawn Lloyd was a guy who I liked a lot, and Ray Davis of Kentucky I liked a lot. So I'll be interesting to see. And the third guy under the radar who I really liked was the Missouri guy. I can't think of his name. Let me try and pull that up. But while I'm looking that up, I'd be in. Those
Are
are
you
my.
talking about Cody Schrader?
Yes. Cody Schrader to me has really great burst. He kind of reminded me of a poor man's Danny Woodhead. He showed pretty good at the Senior Bowl. I think Cody Schrader can be a real good third down back in the league.
Yeah, Marshawn Lloyd, he shows up in a lot of like my advanced stuff as being kind of underrated. I mean, right now, his like projected draft capital is pretty low, but it's not a huge deal at running back because this is where we are with this draft class. I think from a rookie perspective, from a best ball perspective, you can take some shots on these guys, but these guys are gonna have to luck box, I think, into year 1 opportunity. All of these guys, because they're
Yeah,
probably because most of them are going to be round 3 or later picks, right? We already talked about
absolutely.
it. All of them might be. They actually, everyone might be around 3 or later. So
and there's
from a
so
dynasty
many.
perspective, they're more intriguing than probably a best ball perspective because of that. Like, and you granted, if you're going 5-6 RB builds or you're going to 20 rounds on FFPC, like you can flavor of choice, throw whatever dart you want. Like this is like the time of year where we were taking shots on like Puka Nacua last year and stuff like that. Your longer shot guys that aren't going to come with draft capital, but you're just hoping, like I said, luck box into opportunity. That's what this running back class is really going to be.
Yeah, well, the
And we
thing
might have a
is,
couple situations, like you said, like if the Chargers don't take a veteran, which I think they will. I think the Chargers are going to be one of these teams that add a veteran back and a rookie. But like the Chargers say they get frozen out. They can't afford any of these guys because they are in some cap hell a little bit year 1 with this new regime. And they're gonna have to figure some things out. And let's say that they don't get a veteran guy, like a really one of these guys at the top, but then they take a running back in the 3rd round. That guy is still, from a fantasy stance, is gonna get boosted up
yeah.
because of the opportunity, that system, coming with Harbaugh and Greg Roman, like that guy is going to be talked about. He's going to get pushed up the board in the fantasy space.
So I've at the one of my big takeaways, and every year I get a couple from best ball. I still feel like we really don't have a consensus on the best way to attack the nature of best ball. And that is
It's very fluid.
that you need to advance, but once you advance, it doesn't matter because you have 3 individual weeks where your team has to find a way, a narrow margin to advance. So I'm looking at this, and this is to your point about these rookie running backs. See, I am very interested in these guys for best ball because if they get an opportunity, when is it likely to be? So you build a team with draft capital. I'm much more interested this year in trying to get a McCaffrey, Brees Hall, or Bijan in the first round than I was last year, where I was more looking for wide receiver early because running back has been pushed up a little bit this year. They're not the
Well, especially
values.
this time of the year, though, because there's no clear. There's so many things are nebulous right now. No one has
Correct.
answers.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and so you got Rashad White and Pacheco going in the third, fourth round. I mean,
because
to
we
me,
know. Yeah, because we know.
yeah, because we know, but we don't know. So like to build. I'm trying to build teams in my first 10 to 12 rounds that can advance, right? That obviously I still want those guys to show up in the playoff weeks, but when you
Not
draft
checked.
those first 10, 12 rounds, you're saying these guys are going to help me advance, right? And then you mix in all these rookies. You watch my teams and they're loaded. Wide receiver, there's just so many good rookies that they're still there. Some of them are still there in the 18th, 19th, 20th round. And same thing with these running backs, because you don't start going off the board to the 12th, 13th, that there's plenty of them there. So I like to take at least 2 rookie running backs and 2 to 3 rookie wide receivers in the back half of the draft, with the theory, they might start a little slow, but if they get the volume in the big, all it takes is a guy like Ray Davis having 130-point week, and that could be what gets a team of yours into the finals. And then who knows what you need that week. But that's kind of
That
my
makes
thought.
sense. Yeah, I mean, it all depends on what has gotten you to that point. Is it a 5 running back build? Is it a 6 running back build? What have
It's
you done at the front to make you warrant
correct.
wanting to use those guys? Yeah, I mean, I like the idea though of the rookies, kind of making you're looking for that last quarter of the season kind of push.
Kind of the supercharge your playoffs
Yep, yep.
and you know what? You can also have, let's say Marshawn Lloyd, let's say Eckler resigns with the Chargers, and they take Marshawn Lloyd in the third round. Well, in the beginning of the year, maybe he's fighting off Kelly, maybe he's fighting off the kid Spiller who's still around. But let's say Eckler gets hurt week 2, and now Marshawn Lloyd's the starter, right? I mean, there are going to be situations like that as well, where these guys are brought in to be the change of pace guy, and then there's an injury, and then they're not the change of pace guy. So, just kind of having that thought process. Out of the late wide receiver rookies, do you have any favorites so
I
far?
mean, so what's interesting about this draft class, like I said, is we've got these.
Oh, and also running back. I'm sorry to interject, but also I mentioned who I liked. I neglected to ask you who you liked.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely Marshawn Lloyd is on my short list of guys that I was digging into early on, and he popped in a number of areas. Obviously projects a little bit lower than some of the guys that we named and didn't even name yet too. The other thing too I think is fun about this draft class is there's so many the offspring of just NFL greats, man. It makes me feel so old. Obviously, we've got Jerry Rice has a son on the offside. We've got Frank Gore. We got Marvin Harrison. There's just so many guys.
I don't think
That
we're going to have to worry about Frank Gore Jr. I watched
no,
his. I
probably
watched
not.
his tape. It was probably he is
And
the most.
Luke McCaffrey. We've got another McCaffrey.
Oh yeah, I haven't watched him yet, but
Converted quarterback.
I think Brendan Rice has a chance.
Yeah, more so than the first one son that came out that played for Washington.
Okay.
But yeah, those guys kind of stand out to me. But it's a very lackluster running back class. I'm going to be very open just based on kind of where draft capital plays and some of that stuff. I think it's pretty wide open in terms of non-excitement versus some guys that we could take some shots on. Wide receivers a little bit more fun. Obviously, it's very front loaded. Obviously, we got the 3 just amazing profiles of Marvin Harrison, Neighbors, and Adunze. Brian Thomas is kind of, I think, an interesting guy that could go kind of one or two ways. He has some really weird comps, a guy like Terrace Marshall, as well as some upside guys like T. Higgins. Troy Franklin is going to probably be drafted higher, I think, than people are projecting him because he's going to be fast as hell. Like
I come out of almost every draft with one of Brian Thomas and Trey Franklin. I
mean,
really like both of their tapes. I think Trey Franklin is a lot more than just speed. I
yeah,
think
but
he's
when you look at the current ADP for these guys, and I'm looking at it right now on just the underdog ADP, and Marv is going wide receiver 11, but then you
which
go
is ridiculous.
right because I mean, there's no way for him to get higher than that. But then you look at what the gap between him and Neighbors and Adunze is massive. You got Neighbors then goes at 23, a full 12 picks later, and then Adunze goes another 12 picks after that. Like these guys should all be tighter. Their ADP should be tighter for sure. For Marv to have that large of a gap over those two other guys, it feels outlandish.
I only take all three of them. I haven't gotten any Marvin Harrison yet. I think
Well,
his
he's if his ADP is there, it's pretty tough.
there's just I just can't. I mean, he could end up in New England and be, you know, having Mac Jones throw to him for a year. This is best ball. I like Malik Neighbors as much as I like Marvin Harrison, and I have Odunze more in the tier with Franklin and Brian Thomas. So I typically take those guys. I think Brian Thomas is a really good value. I think he's got a lot of good qualities, and Trey Franklin is just going. I mean, what's Trey Franklin compared to even Brian Thomas? He's going like 20, 30 picks later, right?
Let's see. Yeah, Troy Franklin's going. He's going like in the wide receiver context. He's going one's wide receiver 41,
Troy.
one's wide receiver for 49. But that's also 30 picks of real picks.
Exactly.
So
Franklin was the guy that I was just taking hand over fist. I've backed off
and especially Franklin, the company he's keeping right now, he's going off the board on average over behind Romeo Dobbs, behind Jacoby Myers, behind Jameson Williams, behind Josh Downs. I mean,
my two late guys that I really like at the wide receiver position, and they've both moved. Well, one of them's moved up, and that's Javon Baker. I like Javon Baker. I loved his tape. I was getting him every draft in the 20th round, and now you're starting to see the creep. Because what happens this time of year, if you can watch tape early enough, or if you're a model guy, if you can get your model in early enough, you can get some of these guys at a real good distance price. But then what happens is you're not the only one who noticed how good he looked on tape. And then you start seeing one analyst and another and another.
mm-hmm.
You get 3 or 4 analysts talking about the same guy, and then you start seeing the ADP rise. The other guy that I like, which
Javon Baker's one of those. There's only 6 wide receivers in this draft class averaged over 3 yards per route run against both man and zone coverage. And the 3 guys that you already know are on the list, right? Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, and Adunze. Then Troy Franklin is the 4th guy. The other 2 guys are Javon Baker and then Malik Washington, who basically projects as like a pure slot guy. But those 2 are the other 2 guys.
My Malik Washington is Jacob Cowing.
Yeah, I like him too, but I like him a lot as a player. I'm gonna draft him probably in Dynasty. His projected draft capital looks terrible though. That's the only problem.
Yeah.
But I like him a lot though. I don't think there's a huge difference between Jacob Cowing and a lot of these guys that are maybe some of these guys that are projected in like that round kind of 2-3 range. Like you talk about Brendan Rice. I don't see like I think Cowing could end up being a lot better pro than him. Guys in that kind of range. I mean, what's going to be interesting about this and how you approach this from a best ball is that round 2, because those wide receivers, that's the complete glass half full, glass half empty. That's your volatility tier where we know we're going to have hits and misses. So how do we spread our exposure out? How do we attack that tier? The Lad McConkeys, the Keon Colemans, the Donnie Mitchells, Roman Wilson. These are all guys that are going to be drafted in the top 60 picks, but have pretty glaring negatives that come with them too, as well as upside. Ricky Pearsall, like these are all guys that are going.
You just named the 2 guys who I am lower on so far than what I'm hearing on Twitter. Ricky Pearsall and Lad McConkey seem to be real favorites of some very smart people.
They're basically both tracking to go in round 2. Pearsall maybe fringe, but definitely McConkey looks like he's like a lock to almost go in round 2. Basically, like everyone, if you're tracking all like the people in the know that are mocking all these things, which they tend to be pretty accurate, at least in the ballpark in terms of actual cost. Like even if he slides a little bit, like he's definitely going to go in round 2. You got, and Jalen Polk is another one of these guys. Like those guys are all going to go probably top 60, top 75.
Even if they go third round, there's so many of them. Some are going to drift, right? Yeah. And it doesn't mean they're going to have less of an opportunity than the guy who went 15, 20 picks earlier. It really depends on the team and the depth chart and the coach. You know, the coach is so important in this. Some coaches are eager to get rookies going. Some aren't. But I want to give you 2 comps, and they're kind of interesting comps. So I was famously on Tajay Spears last year, so I get asked, who's your Tajay Spears of this class? And I say, well, I don't think there is a Tajay Spears in this class. But if there was a Tajay Spears, I think it would be Ray Davis. I think he does so many things so well, and he really shows up on tape. The other one is, I liked Tank Dell a lot last year. Who's the Tank Dell? I don't think there is a Tank Dell in this class, but if there was, it would be Jacob Cowing for me, because he's just so good in and out of breaks. And I find that that's a skill that tends to translate at the next level, because being able to get in and out of your breaks so quick causes you to be open.
He's one of the guys, like my model is very much higher on him than where his current projection is. So he's a guy definitely I'll be looking to grab cheap in these dynasty rookie drafts, depending he doesn't like completely brick and go like round 7, which I don't think is going to happen. But, he definitely is a guy that shows up for like a career production stance. He looks pretty good. I mean, and we didn't even talk about like Xavier Worthy. He's in that much. Like there's a lot of those guys in that range though. Like we know there's gonna be hits and misses, and like navigating that like area of wide receiver is gonna be pretty interesting this year, because that's where you're gonna see like your big hits or big misses, and a lot of those guys have pretty significant touchdown potential, even going back to their college days. So like it's gonna be fun to see. And then you've got kind of like just the pure slot guys, like I mentioned. Malik Washington, you have the other Washington, Taz Washington, who's a pure slot guy. Malachi Corley, who some people like, he's definitely just like an all slot guy. These guys fit in.
Let me throw out this name, because he's a model buster, and it's Leggett, Xavier Leggett.
Oh yeah. I mean,
he didn't do anything until his senior season, and then he looked. He is not going to look good on your model, but he looked great on tape. And, he's going to need to be an outlier to overcome what put him so poorly on people like yours model.
Yeah, I mean, 75% of his, career college receiving yards came in, his 5th year of college. Again, this is unique. Like these are new things that are a part of this draft class. We've got so many older guys that, got like are so experienced now because they took advantage. They played an extra year. They got to put up production against, talent that they're just a couple years older than. They got to transfer and move schools, move to new opportunities. So yeah, it's very unique for the situation, like Pearsall you mentioned. I mean, he's going to be a 24-year-old rookie. Like there's all these things, like there's a reason, like sometimes you're like, oh, this guy looks good. It's like, well, yeah, he's running against an 18-year-old. Like right. It matters. Like that's like being 23 and playing against 18-year-olds is a lot different than being, 28 in the NFL against the 24-year-old or 23-year-old in the NFL. Like there's a significant difference, right?
Yeah. Like, and the key thing, but the other thing I also like to think is, again, I think people's dynasty mind and their best ball mind kind of get intertwined more than they should. Like last year, people would say to me, aren't you worried about Tajay Spears? He don't have a knee. And I was like, well, for dynasty maybe, but for best ball, I mean, when I look at what he did last year, if he just does that for the next year, I'd be thrilled in best ball. So like Cowing is kind of older. Who's the other? Ray Davis? I've mentioned him 5 times. He's a 5th-year senior. He's what? He might be older than Amari Cooper. The whole famous so and so still younger than Amari Cooper. But I mean, for me, I don't care about that for best ball. In fact,
yeah, for best ball it doesn't matter. But even from a dynasty stance, like you're still looking for guys that still were productive and young. Like Cowling is a guy who was a sophomore at age 19 that had production. So
he had 2 really big junior in his last.
So you're not as worried because it's more of a career thing. Like he's been productive. He just stayed in school for maybe he didn't get the projected draft capital that he was hoping for last year. Maybe he just wanted to finish his senior year. These are things like we don't know for the thought process that goes through, especially when you add like the COVID stuff that everyone got to play through, like this group. So we don't know, but a guy like Leggett, where like a guy doesn't do anything until he's 22, pushing 23. It's a tougher evaluation, right? Like it's like, yeah, he does. He looks like a beast in some of the stuff. Like
he looks like $1 million.
But I
wanted to dislike him because I have a process where I watch at least 4 games from everyone that I think is worthy of getting the 4 games, which is most of these players, everyone we've talked about. I'll watch a game or 2, get an initial thought, then I will go look at their stats. And then I'll go look on Twitter and see what other smart people say. And then I'll go watch the last 2 games with all that information in my mind. And it kind of gives me a good overall sense of not only what I think of the guy, but what the field thinks of the guy. And I didn't want to like Leggett as much as I did. But he does. He looks like almost like a DK Metcalf. Junior kind of guy, and then you say to yourself, well, if he's that good, why didn't he do it until his 5th year? All
of those guys that we talked about, that we rattled off, that those guys are all from a best ball stance are all going wide receiver 60 or later. I think you need to be aggressively attacking that group, even if you miss along the way.
Because you're just looking, if you do 100 teams, you're looking for that one team that gets the right combination, right?
Like, how could you possibly in your right mind take a guy like Demario Douglas, like over like any of those guys, like from a best ball stance? Like,
I don't think if I have a share of Demario Douglas.
But you know what I mean though? Like
it's one. Completely, and it's one of the biggest things that I've changed over the last 2 years. Is
like, how are you taking Wan'Dale Robinson over any of those guys?
I like see that I disagree on. I like Wan'Dale.
That's your Giants. Your Giants.
No. He really.
What's like what kind of apex game are you getting from Wan'Dale Robinson from a best ball stance?
Right. I mean, I don't know. I think the guy could put up really good numbers. He hasn't been healthy, and the offense has not been functional. I think he is a.
And he's probably going to have to compete with a wide receiver selected at pick 6 overall.
Yeah, but not for the same role. They showed they really.
No, he's good. That's what I mean. His role is just like not intoxicating. Versus
I don't disagree with that, but I think we're agreeing on the larger point, and it ties into the point.
People were doing this last year with like Elijah Moore, right? Like Elijah Moore, like the writing was on the wall, like what kind of player, NFL player Elijah Moore was going to be, and people kept trying to talk themselves into what the college version or what they were hoping Elijah Moore was going to be because he was on the Jets. And he proved to be the same player he was years 1 and year 2 in a different situation. Like you should, like these guys where like we know kind of what they are, like you should be taking shots on like these rookies. Like who would like Brandon Cooks has an ADP higher than all these guys we talked about. Like what are we doing?
I mean, Brandon Cooks is interesting in Dak stacks. And if something happened to CeeDee Lamb, but I get your point.
But we lived it. Like we had probably like Dak probably doesn't roll back the season he had last year statistically. There's probably just some natural regression. He was so good last year. And Brandon Cooks was unusable last year. So
That's fair. You kind of
I
just
was on Brandon Cooks last year.
you just kind of talked me off of Brandon Cooks a little bit. So I was just going to say that this ties into the point I was trying to make earlier about how you want to advance your team with earlier picks and then load up the back half of your guys draft with less safe guys, because if you need that combination of 3 or 4 guys who are peaking late to get through the 3-week playoffs in the best ball.
Yeah, those are the guys, like that tier guys, because they're going to come with the draft capital that they're going to play. Like a lot of those guys are just going to play. And that's all you care about at wide receiver.
I like Worthy. Worthy has some puzzling things, like drops, and there's things about his game that you wish were better, but
Adonai Mitchell's the guy that like I have a tough time nailing. Like
I have avoided him, and so many because his ADP is on the front end. I'd rather take chances on some of the. I think he's going to take a couple years to get good.
I don't even, and he's because he has, like, if you were building a wide receiver, he would look a lot like him from a stature size. He's a good mover too, but like he just did nothing. I mean, just did absolutely nothing at both schools. No production. I mean, absolutely no production. One of the worst guys in this draft class too against man coverage, which I do stock a lot coming from college to pro. Like
I can't wait to look at. Do you publish those? Or do I have?
Yeah, I'll be doing stuff on the website. So 2 weeks off the wide receivers. But but I definitely look at a lot of that stuff.
I think that stuff's important
from a college stance. I want my guys to be eviscerating collegiate level.
Right.
I want, and he's a guy that just didn't have the production. But then he has like the one game you go to last year, the Bama game. Like he did give Kool-Aid a lot of work, and it's like it's like, oh man. So I do like guys that
the other guy that I've been struggling with.
He's just real tough because, like you said, he's already expensive. That's what makes it.
The other guy right in that range that I've struggled with. I want your opinion on is Keon Coleman.
Oh yeah, I'm out on Keon Coleman.
All right,
he's one of the guys that shows us he's the inverse of Cowing, right? Where Cowing shows to be completely undervalued, whereas Coleman looks to be completely overvalued.
I kind of like Johnny Wilson from the same team, who goes 8 to 10 rounds later.
I mean, Keon Coleman just has terrible metrics and like all the stuff that I look for, but I understand why he's alluring to people because when he did, like, the plays he makes are very aesthetically wowing, jumping over guys, like those are things you get excited about because they're things
and scoring touchdowns.
Yes. But the consistency of getting open, you look at this draft class. I mean, he's number 1 in this draft class in terms of not open rate, contested catches, and you say, well, all right,
where do you find that?
I have this stuff. You can either go to PFF or SIS, all this stuff.
I'll have to.
And you say, all right, well, he had to play outside and he ran a lot of deep routes. That was kind of the problem. But then you look at his when he did get the move in the slot, he still had one of the highest contested catch rates and one of the lowest contested conversion rates in the slot when he got the move into the slot as well, and try to get some more of the advantageous spots. So it's like, man, and then just the production's just not even. It's just not there. He's a guy I would love if he was more with the group that we talked about, like more regarded and not like a fringe, first rounder. But shit, one of these guys is going to go to the Chiefs, and we'll get real excited. So,
oh yeah, and
it'll be one of the guys that we're probably saying we're not that excited about.
I wasn't that excited about Rashee Rice, and one of my big takeaways is I need to watch all the guys who end up with better draft capital than I expected, just to get a second look, because there were things I did like about Rashee Rice. Another guy I'm kind of out on is Devontae Walker.
Yeah, he's tough, more of a vertical guy, but he's another one of these guys like we talk about from a best ball stance. Like if Devontae Walker is going to give you usable games, they're probably going to be good usable games because it probably comes with like a 40-yard touchdown because that's like the player he is, right? Like. And you saw Underdog released a video that Colt McCoy, my guy Josh Morris, and Drake May did. And he talked about the 2 receivers that the North Carolina had about how when they got certain looks, what they like to do. And Drake May talks that says when Devontae Walker had like, when he had like an option and more freedom in his routes, he always wanted to take the vertical route. He always wanted to try to run by guys. That's what he wanted to do. That's the type of player you're getting. Like, so if he does hit from a best ball stance, though, like he could be pretty bad even as a rookie, but like you might get usable actual best ball.
You might get that 25-point week when you need it.
Right. You might get that game from him.
Even
for being down on him kind of big picture, like he would fit kind of like what you're talking about, though. Like you're trying to catch one of these games in week 16 where I'm looking for the guy who's going to be on the field that's got a shot to catch the 40-yard touchdown.
Play.
Like that's Leggett, right? Like even having, questions about Leggett fits that mold of like, if the guy's on the field, like he's a big play waiting to happen.
I want to hit tight end real quickly. I like Brock Bowers. I don't care what he looks like next to Gronk. He's just one of those guys who's always open. And I had trouble with Jatavian Sanders at first because he wasn't asked to do much. Almost every touch that I watched was a screen or a flat pass. But the few times I did get to see him doing, seams, which is very important for a tight end, is seam routes. I think Jatavian Sanders is very interesting. Your thoughts on Bowers, Sanders, and I've watched a couple of these other tight ends, and none of them really made me excited for best ball year one.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're coming off of a year where obviously everyone's want to latch on to the production we had from these rookies. And honestly, the way the current defensive meta is being played is it leans into these guys being more productive earlier because the middle of the field is open more. We're getting a lot more too high than ever in the NFL, a lot more zone coverage. And it gives the tight ends. I posted a tight end trends article and I will update it again this year. That has shown like the tight end position is being used more than ever was. And it makes a lot of inherent sense with the way teams are structurally playing defense now, that tight ends being used more. So it does give these guys a little opportunity. The problem is I don't think outside of bringing in Brock Bowers, we're going to see really significant draft capital put into anyone else in this draft class, including Jatavian Sanders. Bowers is very interesting because he actually was like what you talked about Sanders. That's how he was used. I mean, he has a very weird profile for a tight end. We know he's not really like the biggest guy. 40.9% of his targets were screen passes. Not only was that the highest of all tight ends, like that's higher than every wide receiver in this class. 30.7% of his receiving yards came on screen passes. Now, the thing about Brock Bowers, though, you could see this as a little bit of maybe a pullback on him where you say, all right, he was more of a manufactured touch guy. Maybe he's got to learn some more nuance in the NFL. Or you can look at it and say, he's that good with the football. They just wanted to get him the football. And he played at a school with high competition. And he was that good. His yak game is amazing. So maybe they just wanted to get the football.
I lean towards right. The second. I lean to because you do see him down the field, but it just seems like, and that's the knock though on the college game in general is that they run the ball and then they get the ball on these, it's like, if you love bubble screens, man, watch any college game, you're going to fricking have an orgasm. There's so many bubble screens,
but you're just not going to see the capital, I think, put into these guys where like last year we had the 4 guys in the top 40, right? Like we're just outside of Bowers. I mean, Jatavian Sanders is tracking to be like a late second round pick. Dallin Holker and Ben Sinnott, like those guys are they're interesting from a dynasty perspective, but I don't see their path to like year one, like playing time. Like last year, we had all those guys.
Jaheim Bell nearly as much as some of the other people I've seen on Twitter. I was not.
I mean, there's just no draft capital that's going to be put there to like where it was last year. Outside of maybe Sanders as being a guy you can kind of say like could have it, but like Bowers is going to go in the top 15. So, if you want to,
my takeaway,
I imagine Bowers is probably going in like I imagine right now he's going in like probably like in the Njoku range, like that kind of area.
right there. I'll tell you. Just give me a sec.
So he's probably already going ahead of Pitts. who's probably an intriguing guy coming out of the Arthur Smith wake, and
Yeah,
also a
he's
guy we
going
talked
right
about.
after Kittle, and he wasn't
Ooh,
going this high even a couple weeks ago when I was drafting a lot.
wow,
Because
wow, wow.
he was behind Ingram, and now he's moved up to a 77 ADP, and this is half PPR. So I am less interested in a Brock Bowers in an underdog than I
Because he
would
has to be
be.
your first tight end, right? Unless you're going elite tight end, him is your two.
Exactly.
Which why would you?
And well, and also look, I play FFPC tight end premium. One of the big
Okay. Yeah.
misunderstandings that people have is they push up all tight ends because of
Right.
that.
Yeah,
When
I've talked about
only
this in this
5 or
too.
6 like Evan Ingram to me is such a great value right now on the FFPC. You're losing Ridley. Zay Jones might not be back, and the guy
He's
had
probably going to catch 30 more passes than Brock Bowers.
yeah. And so exactly. So all right.
And
Last
Pitts is going to be interesting to me this year, not just because I want to keep going back to the Pitts well, but obviously we're out of the shadow of Arthur Smith. And also, Pitts is another guy who talked about he had an extra surgery that kind of wasn't reported last offseason. And
yeah.
he said he basically didn't recover again. Another one of these guys that just played kind of more injured than we knew going into last year.
Yep, I agree, and we had
One mistake I made last year was, and not Pitts wasn't a guy I was drafting, but Pollard was kind of having more on the injury optimism hill, like trying to get more in on these guys I thought were discounts, but also just weren't going to be playing healthy, and like that kind of hurt me a little bit. Even a
that's
guy like Brees Hall, who came through for the teams that we needed to advance because he turned it on those final 2 weeks of the best ball season. But up until that point, like how many Brees Hall teams didn't advance? Like didn't even get to shot to advance.
absolutely, and that's one of the things I think as a company uh, of Sharp we need to focus more on this year is really making sure we
And I
understand
know
the
better. I've been
injuries.
playing.
We
You
know it,
share.
but it's so easy.
It's
But
the
there
Cicada
were
siren song.
no. It's not even that. It's that we don't know the questions to ask. Like
No,
I
right.
never heard. What was that surgery that Pollard had? I had never heard of that before.
The
The
tightrope
one,
surgery. He had tightrope
yeah,
surgery, right? Yeah.
yeah. So I like it. I don't even remember reading that he had tightrope surgery. So what I'm saying is, I think we need to dig deeper into what exactly procedures did these guys have.
Because
But
we got a number of guys that, obviously Hawkinson, Tank Dell, like these guys had late injuries, and we need to keep tabs on, when their surgeries were, what
Tank
they're
Dell's
having.
going in the front end of the third round. And I love Tank Dell, but I'm not touching him so far. The other point I wanted to make, and we'll kind of head out with that and get your last thoughts. To me, the takeaway of the tight ends being so good last year has nothing to do with tight ends. It's that we knew it was a good tight end class, right? Now we know it's a good wide receiver class. So we need to all the more kind of have that mindset of if you want late guys, in other words, we got to pay attention to how good the class is because that's where you're going to find the values. If there was 5 or 6 great tight ends last year and they were being drafted pretty late. This year, like we didn't even mention Roman Wilson, and he's
Yeah, I
like
threw him in that group. I threw him in that same group. That's what I talked about. That my biggest takeaway sitting down with you and giving kind of my first look, walking through this and seeing where guys are going is that tier of guys that I talked about that we know is going to have the draft capital. Even you don't even have to like these guys, but the McConkey, Roman Wilson, Keon Coleman, Xavier Legette, Adonai Mitchell, Jalen Polk, Devontae Walker, like that group of guys are all going to go, Ricky Pearsall are all going to go pick 75 and higher. And they all have wide receivers 60 or lower ADPs right now. Like that's, I think that's where you got to be attacking right now.
And that is the biggest takeaway from this show. I want to thank Rich Hribar at Lord Reeves. Always a pleasure to talk with one of the smartest guys in the game. Want to have you back on in maybe a month if you can.
You gotta be a little
And
sharper than a little more well versed.
well, I think it was a good. I think we set the table for that session. So, just before we go, just give everyone who might not spend as much time over as sharp football as they should, just exactly what they can expect from your workload this year.
Yeah, I mean, always I'm someone at the site that does a lot and in depth. If you've read one of my articles, but I try to write my articles. Listen, you're going to read prospect articles this offseason. You're going to read something about, Keon Coleman. You read something about Marvin Harrison. My goal and what I've always done as someone that's write a matchups column for over 10 years is even if you're going to read something I write, I'm going to give you something that you didn't get in any other of the articles. I'm going to drop some nugget or something you did not see in any other space in the industry. That's what I strive to do. I try to give you something that you can't find anywhere else. I promise that if you read, no matter what I write about any prospect that you have, you're going to see something that was like, oh man, I didn't know that about that guy.
And you can't do better than that. Rich, thanks for joining. Thanks to everyone for listening. And I will be back sometime next week. I haven't finalized. I've got two guys. Ryan McChrystal is agreed to join me sometime over the next week or two, and Neil Orfield, who is a really, really sharp guy, starting his own podcast. And one of the guys who really stuck out to me last year as someone I wanted to get to know better. So I'm really looking forward to having him on to kind of talk high level best ball. We're putting together our plans for Sharp Football Best Ball. There's a decent chance we're going to do that again this year. And I am excited about this year, and I'm looking forward to giving you the information. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you soon.